Good morning and welcome to our learning circle today. Food is our medicine with Mair Greenfield. Today's conversation is presented with Nourish and the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh nations. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box below. Today's learning circle will be exploring food is our medicine, understanding Indigenous foodways to work towards healing and reconciliation in healthcare with our guest, Mair Greenfield. I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves in just a few moments. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarain Squawkin. I'm the new Learning Circle Manager. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Joining us today working behind the scenes is Cynthia Lung, our production coordinator. She'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'd like to provide a gentle heads up that today's topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you are looking after yourself, and if at any point you feel that you need to talk to a friend, elder, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat for you if you need additional support. Now I'll turn over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
So, bonjour, Mair Greenfield Dijnakas, Iwe no Nkwen Donjba, Kibwak First Nation Donjba, Iwe no Nkwen Endayong, Nourish Donoki. So my name is Mair Greenfield. I'm from North Bay, Ontario. My family is from North Bay and Kibwak First Nation. I'm part of the Bear Clan, and I have a mixed heritage with First Nations, Italian, Irish, and French settler relatives. I do my best to live and be guided by the 7 grandfather teachings. And in saying that, I'm going to open us up with a smudge. So if you have a smudging practice that you like to do, please go ahead and collect your supplies and smudge with me. And if not, that's okay too. I do have a smudge prepared here for us already. I've added tobacco, sage, sweetgrass, and cedar to invite our ancestors to support and guide us with an open mind and heart today. And then I also added some moose moss, or sometimes called caribou moss, because it is a medicine for your lungs. And I'm healing from COVID-19. I had it last month and my lungs are a little bit sore. So I might be coughing a little bit more than usual today. So hopefully this will help. And then also I would like to share it with others that might be having a similar experience. So I have my matches. I try not to use a lighter, but I've been told you can use a lighter if you don't have matches. Make sure I wash my feather so it starts off with a new feel and spirit for our conversation today. And I'm going to send smoke in all 4 directions, offering good intentions and positive energy. It's raining here today, which is kind of usual for the area that we're in, but I'm happy to see the rain come because that means it's cleaning the earth from its winter rest. And I know this is going to be happening for a couple months now as we move into spring. So I began with the west, so hopefully you're feeling that. To the south. East. So I bring the smoke up to my eyes so I can see clearly, to my ears so I can hear true intentions, to my mouth so I speak good words and speak the truth. And then I also inhale a bit to cleanse my lungs. I bring it to my heart so I speak with truth and open up my heart. And I cleanse my body. I'm going to offer some to you. So miigwech for opening in a good way with me. I do want to say miigwech to UBC Circle for inviting me to speak here today. And for all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to be present and learn about some of the good things that we are up to at Nourish. A little bit more about me. I live in North Bay, which is very close to Nipissing First Nation, and it's part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, and I'm speaking to you from my home today. So I'm the program manager at Nourish for the Indigenous part of the work that we do. I've been with Nourish for about 1.5 years now. We're a small but mighty team, 5 right now. And my colleagues are Jen Reynolds, who oversees much of the work that we do daily, Robin Speedy, who directs and oversees the Anchor Collaborative, which I'll explain a little bit more about shortly. Rachel Chang, who looks after a lot of our communications and also supports a lot of the Food is Our Medicine platform and design. Shelby Montgomery, who joined us recently in November, and she supports the Anchor Collaborative, but also she's leading and designing what will be the planetary menu action learning series. And then last but not least, we have Haley LaPlum, who is off on maternity leave right now, but I feel like she's always guiding us in the back of our minds, because she has a lot to do with the core of Nourish and why we're doing the things that we're doing now. So Nourish is also guided and supported by members of our Indigenous and Allies Advisory, as well as a Nourish Advisory, and a newly formed board of directors, because we recently spun off from the Pong Foundation into our own entity. But before I get too far into Nourish and also Food is Our Medicine, I wanted to share a little bit about my journey that led to working with Nourish. I also have a disclaimer that I'm not a food expert. I'm not an expert in food sovereignty. I don't consider myself to be a knowledge keeper in the sense that I don't share teachings quite yet. And I've not worked in healthcare, and I don't have any formal healthcare setting or training in this setting. So you're probably thinking, what is she doing here? But I'll explain through a story of my career in this point of time. So after babysitting at a young age and picking strawberries, my employment path began in restaurants. So I started as a hostess as a teenager, and I served and managed in restaurants and pubs for about 15 years. So I do have food handling safety certificates, and I know a bit about food from this, but I don't have vast experience with growing or purchasing, though I do like to grow tomatoes and ceremonial sage in the summer. You might be able to see there's a big bushel back there that I grew this summer. My post-secondary started with graphic design, and I ended my schooling career with an honors BA in criminal justice. So I worked with youth in secure custody for a few years, and I have a pretty good idea of the quality of food that is served in institutions. And I've also worked in the university setting when I worked with the Office of Indigenous Initiatives at Nipissing University, where I led the service learning, mentorship, and peer-to-peer programs for Indigenous students and families. So again, I have an idea of how food is served and prepared in big institutions. And I have an idea of the ins and outs and challenges institutions can face when trying to bring traditional foods into these settings. So working with the university for about 5 years led me to shift careers yet again and move into the tech startup world with a not-for-profit called Rumi. I worked there for about 5 years again, building digital libraries that were delivered through tablets with a software that was built by Rumi, designed to deliver digital files like YouTube videos, MP3, PDFs, and many types of Android games with no internet required. So we would deliver about 10,000 resources on one tablet. So we kind of described it as a library in a tablet. And in building these offline digital libraries, this led me to Nourish. And I found their resources so beautiful and so meaningful that I contacted Haley, who I mentioned earlier. And she was happy to share these resources on these tablet libraries and communities, that remote communities across Canada. So in the fall of 2020, after many conversations with Haley, I decided that I should join Nourish. This was when the pandemic was about 7 months old. And I felt that's something that really stood out to me while I was working in non-pandemic times and visiting remote communities, was that food really needed to be addressed. And this had to be done from many different angles. And it was more than eating, but it was also so that people could be physically well and mentally well. And also communities needed to be sovereign. So this segues me into talking more about Nourish. So I'm just going to share my slides here. So Nourish is a not-for-profit organization, and we believe that food is a powerful way to build health for both people and the planet. So in addition to providing comfort and healing to patients while creating more resilient communities and addressing climate change. By starting from a community of practice, we have grown into a network of leaders, organizations, and communities, shifting the focus upstream to work preventatively through food in healthcare. In the fall of last year, we became a charitable organization, and to reflect our current work, we are now known as Nourish Leadership. So we do our work through a couple different ways or methods. One is by working with cohorts of leaders, and the second is by sharing what we call the action learning. So this is pretty much what I'm going to talk most about today, is the action learning part, and the food is our medicine. When we work with cohorts, we work to equip and innovate individuals and teams, and we work to empower bold leadership in climate action and health equity. And we work across community, institutional, and policy scales to steward innovation. So I'll take a little bit to go through the agenda for today. With Nourish, we really like to take part in and participate in grounding and presencing exercises. So today I'm going to share a grounding exercise with you. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Nourish as a whole, and then introduce and share some understandings of Indigenous foodways, acknowledging that there is immense diversity in foods and foodways across Turtle Island or Canada, and the perspectives that are unique to each culture and person. We're going to acknowledge the history and current day context of health in highlighting why this work is so urgent and important. And then we're going to go over the areas, or what we like to call seasons, explored in the Food is Our Medicine learning journey, and then offer some calls to action at the end. And hopefully we'll have enough time after I'm done talking to have space to discuss any questions or thoughts that you have. So if there's any questions, you can put them in the chat. And Sarah and I asked her to interrupt me if I'm going too fast or if we need a break, because I can't see anybody, and all I'm looking at is my computer right now. So it's kind of hard for me to get any cues. So if there's anybody that needs a break, just let us know in the chat and we'll stop there for a bit. So we're going to go with a grounding exercise. So I felt like that was a bit of an earful to open up with. And as I hinted before, something we really like to do at Nourish before we dive into a big discussion or listening session is to ground ourselves. So I'd like to share sort of a visualization journey for you now, and I hope it will make you feel some grounding as we discuss the importance of food as medicine. So before we begin, I'd like to share another disclaimer that I'm aware that visualization exercises may not be for everyone. When I first started with Nourish, I had never done anything like this before, and I was very, very uncomfortable doing it. It was not my style, but after a few events, and I would just sit there not partaking, I thought, well, you know what, I'm at home, no one can see me, everybody else is doing it, so I would just turn my camera off, and I tried it, and I really, really liked it. So now when we start with meetings, with the grounding exercises, I'm really excited, and I find myself that I'm more present and more focused in our meeting session after. So If you'd like to bear with me and try this out, that would be wonderful. So before we start, just take a moment to turn off your notifications, turn off your phones. I can't see you, so you don't have to worry about turning off your camera, and I'm pretty sure you can't see each other. But if you can, get yourself into a comfortable position that will give you space to open up your heart and your mind. This could be where you are now, or maybe you'd like to move to the couch or the floor. A lot of what we're going to do in the next little while is visualizing. And hopefully we will have some time to share back some of the thoughts and visuals that came to your mind, either in the chat or during the discussion at the end. We'll be visualizing ourselves in different but familiar places, also with different but familiar people. Some of these people could be with us now in their living form, or they could be from our past. Just gonna take a little drink here, and if you're ready, if you feel comfortable, just to close your eyes and take a deep breath and focus on your ears and exhale. Keep breathing gently and notice what you hear around you right now. Is it a quiet space? Or if it's not, are there cars going by? Are there people in an office? Maybe there's some chatter. Maybe you're at home with your children. It's a snow day here. Actually, it's a rain day, but my daughter is at school. She loves to go to school on the snow days. Maybe you can hear heat coming through your vents. Practicing gratitude for the sounds that we're able to hear. And remind yourself, similar to our smudge that we just had, that your ears are open and ready to hear good words and sounds. Now focus on your lungs and fill them with air. Notice the cool air as it enters. Deep breath all the way. Hold it and exhale. Noticing the warm air that comes out of your mouth and past your lips. How are your lungs feeling? Keep breathing at your own pace. I'm noticing my lungs are a little bit tender, but they're feeling fuller and fuller each day, so I'm grateful for that. Now, if you can take in some air through your nose, take notice if you smell anything. I smell sage and sweetgrass. And exhale through your mouth. And then another big breath through your mouth. Feeling the air travel down your throat and filling your lungs. Breathing out again. Notice the warm air moving out. And remind yourself that your mouth is used to speak good words in an honest way and to be as kind as you possibly can when you speak. Now breathing at your own pace and keeping your eyes closed. If you're comfortable, just travel into your body and through your core. Just give your body a wiggle, feeling your spine, maybe stretching your spine, down your legs, to your feet. And notice your feet. Are they planted on the ground? Are they curled up in your chair? Are they tired from a busy week? Just move them around and give them a stretch. And don't forget to breathe. Now move back through your legs, giving them a wiggle again, and your spine. Feel your core, and take your hand and place it on your heart. Feel your heart open for listening and sharing, and maybe give it a rub. Prepare yourself to take in ideas that are old and new. And then take your arms and stretch them out to the side. Maybe wiggle your hands around. Maybe stretch up to the sky. And lift your head up. Move your neck around and give it a stretch from side to side. Okay, you can open your eyes And just notice how you feel. Do you feel a little lighter? Did you do it? Okay, we're going to do this one more time. But this time I'm going to invite us to think of food as more than a menu item. So how food is also about relationships, stories, teachings, values, connection to the land, connection to traditions, history, skills, knowledge, memories. There's so many ways to think of food. So if you close your eyes again and get comfortable, picture your favorite meal. What is it? Who prepared it for you? Was it prepared for a special occasion? Is this a holiday? Is this a feast? Is it a weekend meal? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? How does it make you feel? Don't forget to breathe. Keeping your eyes closed, we're going to move into a different visualization now. Now you're a hospital patient. You're in the hospital and you're about to eat dinner alone in your hospital room. What is it? How is it served to you? Is it fresh? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? And how do you feel? So if we want to slowly open our eyes, and if you're open to it, you can share your experience in the chat, or we can save it for later. I would imagine, depending on the hospital you were in, the two experiences were quite different. But I also invite you to think, do they have to be different? Why are they so different? So shifting back to Nourish, we can be thought of in different ways. It's a community of practice, an initiative, a catalyst, a think tank, a movement. At the core of Nourish is the drive to recognize the significance of food as a major factor influencing planetary health, community well-being, and equity, all while thinking sustainably. So Nourish creates opportunities for innovation and systems change, looking at wicked problems, which is a term used for big problems. For example, food insecurity would be a wicked problem. And we design ways forward. So we do this by encouraging curiosity, challenging biases and status quo, and taking bold action. So Nourish believes that food is fundamental to patient, community, and planetary health and well-being. So this is a very high-level introduction to Nourish. I feel like this could be an entire presentation on its own. So I'm kind of going to go through this a little bit fast. If you're confused at any point, just maybe put a question in the chat and I can follow up after. Because today I'm here to focus more on food as our medicine, but I did want to put a little premise of how we got there, because Nourish, we do so many things at Nourish. I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what we do. So again, we would be happy to come back and explain Nourish in a different way. But here's my kind of Cole's notes of what Nourish is. So we work within 3 main impact areas, which are equity, climate, and community well-being. So looking at equity, working towards safer, more inclusive, and culturally mindful healthcare services, and addressing upstream determinations of health through food. We do this by looking at costs of health inequities, not only in dollars and cents, but in years of life lost, and in the life experience of those who are marginalized. So through cultural mindfulness, this is a must in patient-centered care, and can be expressed through food served to patients. With regards to climate, we recognize the significant impact of healthcare services and systems on the planet, as well as the role and responsibility of healthcare to provide initiative and leadership on planetary health initiatives. The Canadian healthcare sector generates 5.2% of the national carbon footprint. So rethinking food will be an important way to shrink healthcare's carbon footprint. And our third impact area, by promoting community well-being and resilience through food. We believe that healthcare institutions collaborating with their communities can address both the social and ecological determinations of health. By re-imaging food along the continuum of care out into community and the broader food system. So Nourish flows in different streams. As I said, we work with cohorts across the country to solve deep or wicked problems. And then we also host action learning series to support learning and unlearning. Sometimes Nourish is also able to provide grants for different initiatives. So you may have noticed if you went to our website that during the beginning of the pandemic, we were able to provide a number of food RX grants. I mentioned we worked with cohorts. So right now we're running with our Anchor Cohort, which is 7 teams across Canada working on wicked problems. We might have some of the Anchor Collaborative here today because in this slide, as you can see in the top left, we have a team in Vancouver and UBC is actually part of this team. So I'm going to read for you now Team Vancouver's wicked problem. So forgive me in advance if I stumble on some of the big words that they have in their wicked problem. The wicked problem around how food served in healthcare settings is often wasted and neglected as a therapeutic intervention and regulated to a support service. This collaborative brings together the second largest hospital in Canada, being Vancouver General Hospital, with UBC Faculty of Medicine's Planetary Healthcare Lab, along with the healthcare centers, academia, Indigenous groups, local growers, community advocates, and prominent chef Ned Bell from Chefs for Oceans. This team strives to take more of a holistic view in food in healthcare settings, acknowledging food not only as an economic good, but recognizing its power as a source of nourishment, cultural identity, dignity, and a link to nature. So along the continuum of care with this perspective, meals can reflect diverse cultures, sustainable provenance, and in doing so, improve patient nutrition experience and equity while mitigating global climate change. Ooh, so there's a lot of information and layers in that problem I just read. And if you'd like to know more, you can come to our website and you can also ask questions in the chat or send an email to me. So moving on from that, the Anchor Cohort was the next logical step after the first Nourish Innovator Cohort. So I'm going to explain very broadly again how this cohort demonstrated that together, people had a greater capacity to experiment and innovate towards better futures when they working in groups instead of working alone. So the Innovative Program is our first program, and it had 26 individuals working together across the country. And now our new Anchor Cohort is made up of 7 teams that are working together across the country. So we are getting a little bit closer to food as our medicine, but I feel like it's really important to figure out how we got here and share how we got here to give the program a little bit more meaning for you. So if you were at the last UBC circle, you may have heard from Tessie Harris, who is number 13 on the slide, again at the top left. Tessie works with First Nations Health Authority, and I'm going to take a moment to talk about how great Tessie is. I believe Tessie is here, but I can't see the chat right now. So if you're here, Tessie, hopefully you can say hello in the chat. Tessie was part of the Innovative Program, but Tessie also does a lot more with Nourish. She sits on our Indigenous and Allies Advisory, and she was a big part in helping us report and capture the Food RX granting program that we held last year. And Tessie also was a major writer and contributor to Food is Our Medicine. So Tessie and I worked for hours and hours going back and forth, building this online library and the learning journey. And I was thrilled to work with Tessie, and she's just such a great human. So miigwech Tessie for all that you've done, and I hope you're here. Tessie and I were chatting last night, and she did give me permission to share some of her thoughts about the Innovator Program and also Food is Our Medicine. So between the end of 2016 and 2019, the Nourish Innovator Program brought together 26 professionals from across Canada, working in food service management as dietitians and buying food or supplies or policy, and they all dug in deeply into these systems, values, forces, and visions around food in hospitals and health facilities. So it was a dive into identifying what works well, what needed to change, and how do they make these changes. So the program was designed to support each innovator to take on personal learning and leadership development, and also take on projects at each of their work sites to develop collaborative projects with innovators from across the country. So for Tessie, this program really introduced thinking in systems and how to think about systems change that addresses the roots of problems that we see and experience. So instead of service level or band-aid solutions, which are very common, those quick fixes don't support real change. So Tessie's personal project was in Haida Gwaii, and she worked with the community and with Northern Health to switch meal services at the hospital and long-term care homes from retherm meals to cooking on site, which created an opportunity to integrate more local and traditional foods because they were actually cooking in their kitchen. So now we're going to focus on the collaborative project that Tessie was involved in, which was the traditional food groups. So two of the many insights that came out of the Innovator Program that influenced and informed the Food is Our Medicine work that we will continue to discuss today was that food matters to patients. It's fundamental to healing, a key social determinant of health, and a powerful intervention point for environmental sustainability. So I recognize that this might be obvious to you, but however, in the healthcare system as a whole, food and nutrition is often a lower priority than the other areas. So the understanding shared here is not across the board. And there's so much missed opportunity in supporting better patient experience, well-being, and feelings of comfort and safety through food. So we're not just working in food in health systems, we're working in deeply entrenched and invisible systems of power. So like colonialism and capitalism. This is huge, and I feel like we could take another presentation unpacking this statement. But knowing what we know, how food is fundamental to healing, what are the constraints on food services? Why are things the way they are? We know that everyone loves to complain about how terrible hospital food is. So let's think about the fundamental values in healthcare of how the decisions are made. So feel free to share what comes to mind as I say these statements, if you'd like to put them in the chat or save them for later. So healthcare as we know it is built on Western ideology and understandings. Food is seen in terms of dollars and cents. Standardization, efficiency, and consistency is valued over cultural understandings and priorities in wellness. Food companies and distributors create contracts that restrict the ability to buy goods from local vendors. Western understanding and policies around food safety restrict the ability to bring in and serve traditional foods. While we are working and talking about food and nutrition and well-being, we must understand that systems that surround it and influence it. We need to identify who holds the power in the system, what are the motivations and the values driving it, and where the leverage points are, and places that we can influence change. As I mentioned earlier, there were 5 collaborative projects that emerged throughout the Innovator Cohort program, and the 5 key areas are shown here. So Food is Our Medicine was born out of the Traditional Foods Collaborative Project, which set out to better understand the system around traditional foods in healthcare facilities. So this group wanted to better understand all of the factors, the stakeholders, and the forces to be able to make meaningful change. So here they are, gathered on 6 nations in Haudenosaunee territory in Western Ontario. Each of the innovators involved in the project invited an elder or a knowledge carrier from their community, and they talked, shared stories, shared insights and experiences. They spent time on the land and they listened to the elders, and they were given guidance on how to best move forward. What was shared and what was learned together, and the understandings of Indigenous foodways that was collectively gained, built the foundation for food as our medicine. So these learnings are integrated into the learning journey that I'm going to share next. There is a common misunderstanding that bringing Indigenous foods into healthcare means getting traditional foods onto patient meal trays. Though that is absolutely true, in fact, there is just so much more to that. Understanding and embracing Indigenous foodways in healthcare is about acknowledging and respecting the land and waters from which the food comes, the stories and teachings in the practices of cultivating and harvesting traditional foods, and the connection to the foodways and connecting the foodways to cultural identity. Culturally appropriate food is understood to include restoring and respecting the relationships that Indigenous peoples have with the land, with ancestors, with current and future generations, and with local environments. So exploring the past, the future of relationships between food and healing will assist you in decolonizing food systems in healthcare settings and advancing the work of reconciliation. So what does this matter to us? Canadian healthcare must apply two-eyed seeing and create more space for Indigenous leadership and ways of knowing. While this is a huge undertaking, these processes start with self through humility, reflection, and cultural mindfulness. The slide reads, "We believe that to deny one's food is to deny them of their culture, a right that is articulated in the truth and reconciliation findings. We at Nourish are working to support healthcare to recognize food as a pathway towards decolonization and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples." So whether or not you are directly involved in serving food in an institution, we all have much to learn from the wisdom in Indigenous foodways, values of respect, interdependence, of being reciprocal, and the responsibility to each other and this land. So I'm just going to take a deep breath here. That was a lot of words. And I'm just wondering if we want to have a discussion about this now, or if we should just move forward and then save the discussion for the end.
Wow, that's been really great. It's really informative and great work to see that you're doing with Nourish, and kind of getting the word out there for incorporating Indigenous foodways into our healthcare system is very much needed, and really glad to hear. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of thank yous from a lot of people in the chats too.
Okay. So should I just continue and then we can just save our discussion for the end?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. So before we move forward, we must look back. So this slide's a bit heavy. So I just wanted to give a prompt that it's a bit heavy, but it has to be said in order to move forward. So the country of Canada was formed through the process of colonization. Colonialism can be described as the policy or a set of policies and practices used by political power from one territory to exert control in a different territory. So it involves unequal power relations. While each Indigenous community has its own unique history and experiences of colonialism, many impacts were felt universally in communities across the land we now know as Canada. Canada's current healthcare system is built on and perpetuates systematic racism and trauma through harmful narratives, dynamics, and practices. The bias against Indigenous peoples and Indigenous ways is persistent and causes ongoing health disparities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous patients and families. There are numerous stories of the devastating and even fatal impacts of racism. So here are two on this slide. The top left is Brian Sinclair. He died in 2008 after waiting for 34 hours in a Manitoba emergency room. He needed medical attention, but was ignored due to medical professionals making false racist assumptions about him. Below is Joyce Echaquan. Just a little over a year now, she died in a hospital in Quebec, shortly after posting live videos to social media of hospital staff making racist comments about her. In BC, in the Plain Sight report released last year, it showed that only 16% of all Indigenous respondents reported never having been discriminated against while receiving healthcare. So if we think about that and do a little bit of subtracting, that means 84% of respondents had experienced discrimination while receiving healthcare. So in addition to the harmful foundations of healthcare in Canada, there are specific ways that colonization systemically and intentionally targeted Indigenous foodways. Canada's formation is a history of legislating First Nations, Inuit, and Métis out of existence, including by erasing Indigenous food cultures, the Gradual Civilization Act, the banning of potluck ceremonies, signing of treaties that exchanged life-sustaining hunting grounds for farmland, livestock, and pitiful amounts of cash. All of it was designed with the purpose of eliminating through assimilation. So building upon a lot of what I've just said and shared so far, Nourish created the Food is Our Medicine Action Learning Series. So the goals of this Action Learning Series are to build the understanding that narrative that food is our medicine, provide healthcare leaders with knowledge and tools to decolonize food in healthcare, and to inspire action and engagement and responsibility around Indigenous foodways in healthcare settings. My personal involvement and my hope for this learning journey is, as an Anishinaabe, and with a responsibility to my community, I would like for Indigenous patients to confidently walk into a hospital and know that they're going to be cared for unconditionally and wholeheartedly. There are three main components to this learning series. The central component is the learning journey. So that is on the left here. It's an educational experience, and you can think of it as an online course that you move through at your own pace. It brings so many incredible resources and ideas together, and following the Nourish way, it encourages lots of grounding and self-reflection and personalizing the journey based on where you are and where you would like to learn. We also created an online resource library, which is full of resources that are related to Indigenous foodways. And the third piece is that each season we host a webinar to complement the learning journey content, which naturally leads me to my next slide. So next week we will be hosting Food is Relationships on Wednesday, February 23rd from 12 to 1:30 Eastern Standard. We're going to explore, as we explored in our grounding exercise, for many of us, our most treasured recipes and practices around food are those passed on to us from previous generations. So considering food in terms of relationships, they can help healthcare professionals to better understand the close connection between what we eat and our physical and mental health. So in this winter webinar, Food is Relationships, we're going to hear from Tori Fisher, who is an Anishinaabemowin language keeper and teacher of Nibizing Anishinaabek from Nipissing First Nation. So Tori's going to share from his expertise in Indigenous histories as a teacher, and also how he and his wife work to pass on practices such as rabbit snaring to the next generation, being their daughters. So this webinar is open to everyone, and though you don't have to be signed up for the Food is Our Medicine learning journey, we highly recommend that you do, but it's not mandatory. So if I go back to the learning journey, we've designed and delivered this in 4 parts. We did this because food grows following the 4 seasons, and it also complements the medicine wheel and keeping with the 4 directions. So for fall, we celebrate food is culture. Winter, food as relationships. Spring, oh, I have my posters backwards. Spring, food is healing, and summer as a pathway. So we worked with designers from Rally Rally and Brightweb, and also Mariah Megwasi to design this beautiful artwork. They're also available on our website if you would like to print them out and put them in your healthcare organization. Our goal is to have 400 learners complete the learning journey by National Indigenous Peoples Day this year, which is June 21st, 2022. Each season has 4 teachings and a set of journaling prompts that you can track in a PDF document that we provide when you sign up for the learning journey on our website. If you haven't signed up yet, today is a very exciting day as we were up late last night finishing our 2.0 version. So we're really excited about that. So if you go on our website, you will see it there today. So with fall, we focus on seeing the path with food is culture. So we do begin fall to honor Brian Sinclair and Joyce Echaquan as they both lost their lives during the fall season. It introduces two-eyed seeing and systems thinking, situating yourself and your work on the land, and looking at the impacts of colonization on healthcare, experiences, and foodways of Indigenous people across Turtle Island. Winter recognizes that food is relationships. Relationships form the foundation when moving towards reconciliation. So in this season, we explore how food is relation, and we help to build this foundation. Food connects people to place, the land and the waters in our homes and to each other. Indigenous communities have always been dynamic, complex, diverse, and existing in relationship with the natural world. Our cultures, ways of being, and food systems are intrinsically linked to the local ecosystem. Ways of relating can be explained through the cycles of life and through relationships among people, all beings, and our environment. These relationships are embodied in the expression, all my relations. In Indigenous worldviews, there is a sacredness, a spirit that exists in all things, and especially food. In spring, we center around coming to know and how food is healing. You will find examples of traditional food guides, stories, and teachings in this season. And it really celebrates the diversity of Indigenous foodways and highlighting self-determination while also offering examples of community-driven responses during COVID-19. The season of summer guides learning through more of the how to move forward and how to move forward with food as medicine. It looks at existing traditional food programs and how they're doing what they're doing and how they're succeeding at delivering these programs. And it also shares some best options for next steps if you would like to put this in your institution. So wrapping up, I highly encourage you to go onto the Nourish website and sign up for the learning journey. It is free. There is no cap on how many people take it. It should take about 15 hours to complete, but this depends on how deeply you engage with the resources and reflections. There's hours and hours of resources to deepen your understanding if you're curious and have questions as well. And as a gift for the first 200 people who finish, we do have a handmade, one-of-a-kind beaded pin. It was created by my friend and artisan, Brittany Gauthier. And these pins were designed for this learning journey. And there's about 150 left right now. So we've had 50 people that have finished it. All other learners will receive a beautiful PDF certificate of completion as well. So if you don't have the time to invest in the learning journey, that's okay. We also have the digital resource library that brings together all these resources from diverse perspectives in a variety of formats. And all the resources are linked to an aspect of traditional foodways or culturally mindful care. And we also recommend that you check out the Nourish films posted here. I will share the links after if you can't find them. And you'll see me again in why hospital food matters for reconciliation. And then the film Michim, which is what drew me to Nourish and the reason why I'm here today. This is a beautiful film. The word Michim is an Ojibwe word and it means food. The film features Nourish innovator and also a member of our Nourish Indigenous and Allies Advisory, Kathy Loon. And she highlights the traditional foods program that Mino Yaman Health Center runs through in Sioux Lookout. So after today, when you think about getting food onto food service menus and patient plates, hopefully you'll also think a little bit more about what food represents, being relationships, stories, teachings, values, connection to the land, tradition, histories, the skills involved, the knowledge and the memories, and what that means to patients and communities. So miigwech, and I'll stop there.
Oh, we have a couple questions here. Are the resources appropriate for youth to learn from?
Some of them would be, but I think that would be up to you, depending on your comfort level of what you share. Some of them you'll have to talk through, but they're not too graphic in nature.
And then we just have another one saying, thank you for the presentation. This person's not connected with healthcare and wondering if food is our medicine course would still be appropriate to take.
Yeah, it can be for anyone. We were really surprised actually with how many people have signed up that aren't in healthcare. So it was designed specifically for healthcare. And we have folks from academia to graphic design to government, food companies. So yeah, it gives you a different perspective and a more of a food perspective. So for sure.
And then we have another question asking what Nourish's relationship / attitude with the fast food industry is like.
We don't really have a relationship with the fast food industry. That's kind of a interesting question because personally, I do eat fast food. But I feel like if I didn't have the option, if I could not have the option, I wouldn't. But I'm just trying to figure out ways to eat more locally personally. I'd have to ask Nourish what their stance is on it because I'm more on the Indigenous foodways.
And then lastly, has there been a culturally safe policy developed around food safety and traditional foods, i.e. Meat, berries, fish harvested from land?
I don't know if there are different policies and ways that are developed, but I wouldn't say there's like an official policy for Canada. And this depends from community to community. Each community has their own ways of preparing, and which has been passed down for generation to generation. I think it's just a matter of policy accepting this as a way, looking at the two-eyed seeing.
Thank you, Mair. It was great to hear you, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you to all our guests for the amazing discussion and just hearing about the library and the coursework that you guys do to integrate Indigenous foodways into the healthcare system is really enlightening and makes me really happy because I know when you think of food in the healthcare system, it's not very tasty and not very nourishing. And to hear about what you guys are doing is really uplifting and makes me really hopeful for the future. Yeah. And just before we end the webinar, we would love to bring your attention to our upcoming UBC Learning Circle webinars. And all our webinars are free to sign up on our website, learningscircle.ubc.ca. And thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing everyone at the next Learning Circle. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.